Okay.
My name is Dominic Parker. I'm a professor of applied economics at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and I was happy to be here to present work on the effects of local judicial and political independence on economic activity. And I'm studying this in the context of a major Supreme Court ruling in 2020 in the US in a decision called McGirt versus Oklahoma. Now, this decision was based on a treaty that was signed in 1830s between tribal nations, indigenous tribal nations, and the US government that guaranteed the tribal nations sovereignty over half of the state of Oklahoma. Well, the state of Oklahoma had governed the tribal areas without accounting for the treaties for over 100 years, and the Supreme Court ruled that no, in fact, those areas should be governed by indigenous tribes. And so after the court ruling, there was a lot of political and media rhetoric about how this ruling would affect economic activity. The state of Oklahoma claimed that it would create economic chaos and there would not be investment in the state of Oklahoma because it was too uncertain and too unsettled what the political and legal governance would look like. Advocates of the tribes and the tribes themselves said, we are more than capable of governing this area in a way that can encourage economic activity and stability. And so my project with a co-author at the University of Wisconsin is to try to look at the facts and look empirically what did happen in Oklahoma in the eastern part of the state versus the western part of the state. It's the eastern part of the state where the tribal indigenous groups acquired or had their jurisdiction recognized. And so we're looking at two major economic outcomes. One is about energy development and mining, so oil, gas, renewable energy, and minerals, and how were those outcomes affected in the east versus the west. And we also are looking in a detailed way at housing markets. So what happened to real estate markets, what happened to applications for mortgage loans and other kinds of building permits in the eastern part of the state versus the western part of the state. So I'll just say, focusing on the housing market for this short interview, is that in brief, we have found no evidence that the ruling created chaos in the housing market. In fact, the housing market has proceeded in a quite orderly, very normal fashion after the ruling. So this is inconsistent with some of the rhetoric that the housing market and that the economic activity in the eastern part of the state would collapse. However, if you peel the onion and look in more detail at what's happening in the housing market, we are starting to see some evidence that Native Americans are more interested in applying for home loans under tribal jurisdiction in the eastern part of the state. And so the ruling seems to be causing more interest among Native Americans to be under their own jurisdictional arrangement rather than that of the state. So by comparison, if you look at people who don't identify as Native American, there's a little less applications, fewer applications for mortgages, but it's not like that market has changed very much for non-Native Americans. So in summary, it looks like the housing market has stayed healthy since 2020, but in the longer run there might be a little bit more efficient sorting where people who want to be governed by tribal governments are choosing to move into these jurisdictions, and this is without the market having many negative signs of collapse of any sort, in spite of what the media has said.